5 seconds to submergence. Submergence deep into the absurd.
All right, we have come to the finale of the Self Reliance series with Mynaa and Miesnowan. Thanks for coming back, man, for the last episode.
Hey, it's good to be here, and thank you for having me.
Of course. It's a pleasure having you. And when we first started this series, I had no idea how long it was going to be or where it was heading. Or it was kind of like going to a party, right? And then you tell your friend that you're just going to have one beer. And then he shows up and he's got this backpack on. And then you're just thinking, okay, what does he have in the backpack, right? And you go and he comes up to you, then he opens up his backpack. He's got like a bottle of vodka, a 30-pack of beer. And you're just thinking, man, I can't let him just do all this like by himself, man. Like I gotta participate. And then you take a few beers, you drink some shots, and the next thing you know, you're rolling along into the very end. So I'm happy to be here. It's been a party.
Well, do you remember anything past the backpack? I mean, I imagine it's a big backpack.
It's a big backpack, and there's lots of things that have probably fled out of my mind, but we've talked about Skynet. We've talked about being honest with yourself. We've talked about obviously self-reliance. We've brought up the gay science. We've brought up the Zarathustra. We've brought up so many things, and it's kind of a blur, but at the same time, you remember those moments that really stick with you. But the main thing, you remember how that night at the party made you feel. And with that, what I mean is that feeling often leads to thought, and thought leads to understanding, and yada yada yada. And I came to a lot of
it's almost like a combing. It's almost like a grooming process almost.
Exactly.
Like there, calm down, we'll get out these knots.
Exactly. And well, and I just understood a few things, especially that this podcast, this Self-Reliance series isn't for the audience. Sorry, but it's for me,
I was gonna say, I didn't necessarily know it was gonna take months. I knew we were going in this direction. I didn't know how long it would take us or where precisely it would take us. I just knew we would go in this direction.
Yes.
Yeah. And also, let me say thank you for coming along for the ride. Yeah.
I am happy to open all backpacks and any backpacks as long as they got something interesting in them. So.
Well, like this one, I found this one on the side of the road. What's in there?
Unless it has a bomb.
You never know. Well, I mean, you never know what's going to be in there. Exactly.
I ain't opening no backpack in Afghanistan. I'll tell you
that. So if you remember back to the very first paragraph of the essay.
Yes, we must eternally recur to the beginning. We must refresh ourselves. So continue.
I read the other day some verses written by an eminent painter which were original and not conventional. The soul always hears an admonition in such lines. Let the subject be what it may. The sentiment they instill is of more value than any thought they may contain. To believe our own thought, to believe that what is true for you in your heart, in your private heart, is true for all men. That is genius. Speak your latent conviction, and it shall be universal. It be the universal sense. For the inmost in due time becomes the outmost, and first thought is rendered back to us by the trumpets of the last judgment. Familiar as the voice of the mind is to each, the highest merit we ascribe to Moses, Plato, and Milton is that they set at naught books and traditions and spoke not what men, but what they thought. A man should learn to detect and watch that gleam of light which flashes across his mind from within, more than the luster of the firmament of bards and sages. Yet he dismisses without notice his thoughts because it is his. In every work of genius, we recognize majesty. Great works of art have no more affecting lesson for us than this. They teach us to abide by our spontaneous impression with good-humored inflexibility than most when the whole cry of voices is on the other side. Else tomorrow a stranger will say with masterly good sense precisely what we have thought and felt all the time, and we shall be forced to take with shame our own opinion from another. So I was speaking to an artist the other day, and she brought up, she's not really painting much these days. She writes a lot. She's a pretty good writer too, but she brought up the question, at least in terms of, modern city life, within our vision, how much of it is a suggestion? How much of it is a requirement or a demand? If you're on the road, for example, the road is making a demand of you, because if you don't follow it, it could well be the end of your life. It's much more like immediate and relevant like that. Whereas, you're driving along and you see billboard after billboard, or you see, phone number listing after phone number listing, call this guy for this or this person for that, right? How much in your visual field is that suggestion? Is that, subtle coercion, or, the words we used to use? You remember when people used to use the word subliminal more?
Yes.
And it occurs to me that, that word is not a common thing you hear these days. And it's because I don't think it's the most effective means of advertising or persuading. Because, it actually, I think we're at that point where Zaf talks about, repression, assuming a more brutal character within a society, right?
Those
of
things
necessity.
we zone out.
Is that it? Wait, you mean like you're talking about the self-sedation, hypnosis, more or less, right? Whether it's wasting time, or is that what you're talking about?
Kind of. I'm more so talking about in any given day, we have lots of shit on our mind, lots of things to do. Mm-hmm. And a lot of the times we'll only pay attention to those things that matter to us in that day, or that are a reflection of our own thoughts, our own psychology, things that we can project ourselves upon during the day, that we can project our thoughts upon, and also things that kind of come into our immediate attention. Like if a dog barks while we're doing this podcast, I'm going to pay attention to the dog, right?
Yeah, and at worst, it's a minor inconvenience.
Yes. But go
on. So that was a question of the visual field. And then, she asked, as a visual artist, as a painter. And then, if you consider back to the notion of subliminal, it's like we don't need that so much anymore, because the propaganda needs to be in your face. With so many things on offer, there's not one a handful of networks controlling the airwaves, right? There's not like the dissemination of information has changed the way we operate in these domains. So you have people competing for attention, and the attention is the currency, right? The attention is the currency as much as the generation of revenue from the attention is currency. Because in an age of public opinion and everything depends on your like counts and your subscribers and things like that, it's just become the nature of the game. So, what can you do to get attention? And, that's always been, that's just inherent in nature. Look at the peacock.
Yeah.
And this is where someone goes, oh yeah, there's a Nietzsche aphorism about proud men and peacocks. We're not going to get into that now. But, but the point is, my friend, as she was following this line of thought, and then I would look to me like kind of imagining what any kind of art, based off of that might look like. And, maybe you could say this exploration or this line of thought isn't new, because we've produced, by we, I mean in the Western canon, there's a lot of literature on propaganda, control, all these things. We've been joking that, it's culture, it's society. And you said, no, it's slavery. And it's like, with slavery with extra steps.
Yeah.
Because it's coercive nature, but, such is life. If you didn't have to work a job, it's like, okay, well, how do you get fed? Where's the hand that feeds? Is it someone else or is it you? And, psychologically speaking and physiologically speaking, that's kind of what we're talking about. If you even brought up the notion of kind of going, sorting through it, sifting through it over time. And then I mentioned it is like a grooming process. Education and knowledge and wisdom itself are that process. You're kind of like the material and the experiment. You're many things in one.
So are you kind of giving an animistic quality to wisdom here?
That's probably just more incidental. I'm not like, I don't really focus on like, oh, what is this kind of, I guess at the moment we're not really focused on like, oh, what does this line of thought most closely resemble? Because I think at the end of the day, what we're always hedging back towards is psychoanalytics.
I mean like a metaphorical sense, as in, are you trying to compare thought and wisdom to a living organism, not something that wills itself into existence?
Well, it's I mean, it would be
changes
us
and adapts, right?
Yeah, that would be us then. Yeah. Then I would be describing us, and that's us as creative beings.
Yes, and our creativity adapts, our wisdom adapts. It changes to the times, and especially with things changing. Because you're always mentioning physiology and how does the modern world affect our physiology? And
yes, it's one of the most important,
right?
Oh, right. Yeah. In terms of that is just one of, countless areas in our day-to-day existence where, we go against our instincts, where we go against, millions of years of animal evolution in the terms of, you think of the skeleton, the joints, the ligaments, how it all connects together and how it best functions and what sort of lifestyle serves it best. But we're far removed from those days. And then the thought, the well-meaning thinkers of the world, the optimists, the thought is like, oh, we evolved past a lot of these things. And then, you look around and you see like, okay, no, we did not. We'll get into that more.
Well,
but part and parcel to it.
Most of our modern advances are essentially us just doing the same stupid shit that we've been doing, but easier and faster and better.
Yeah, and the thought is more and better for more is always the best. It's very utilitarian, very pragmatic. At the end of the day, it's like you wonder how much of it is, somewhat, if just about everything in existence is out of your control, what does that do to, I guess, to the human psychology, which generally wants to put an order to the world and explain these things away. I think I've mentioned it to you before, at least personally for sure, and possibly on the podcast, that, belief itself is the need to know. Like that's what actually that sense is, in the same way that children like are naturally curious. They want to know and they need to know also. It's actually both.
Yes.
And it's the importance of education in the first place. So my brilliant artist friend, she questioned the visual field, and then I'm looking out at thinking about the rest of it. And if you're looking here with me, my question would be, you as an individual, how much of you do you see reflected back at you in this zeitgeist, in your field of vision, in our institutions, in our government, in our public opinion? All these things that concern themselves with the public good, the greater good, the Christian liberal utilitarian good, the general health, the welfare, all these, old stale ideals, that, like, again, they're thought of as a goal rather than, these things to be overcome. I think in this very essay, Emerson has phrased that notion a few different ways, saying, take the way of man, not to him. It's something like that. You're taking the way of him or maybe from him, but you're not taking the road to him.
And certainly not for him.
Well, what good is it going to do him? Exactly. It's the irony of calling it self-reliance, as if in a certain sense, you had another option other than, forces which are against you, but then to be stuck in that mindset, it's like, is that really a yes to life? Are you actually accepting the world as it is? It's one, because I guess, we're drawing a line here between distinguishing not your duty. Back to Emerson's premise of absolving yourself, and then what becomes your duty. And this reminds me of Nietzsche speaking of, men and duty beyond the normal means, or what Emerson has called, he called it the conventional thoughts of man, or being beholden to them. I can't remember his exact words, but this is kind of the things we've been going over through the course of this essay. So how much of you, back to the question, how much of you is reflected in this modern, I don't know, because things seem to move so fast, and a lot of times today's down the memory hole before tomorrow gets here. So, and everyone's wired into their own survival trips. So it's like, how much of the past do we carry forward? How much do we remember? There's all these things that come to mind here. It's more than any just one thing, like, oh, things are changing or things aren't what they used to be, because, people have been saying that forever and they always will.
So are you asking how much of me is reflected into the world, or how much of...
No, how much, when you look out into this world, you as an individual,
okay.
As, let's qualify you further, I could say as an American male, as however we want to term it, right? Like, you as you are in this world, like when you actually, even your own country, how much of you do you see reflected back at you?
I'd say that's a tough question. Mainly because perhaps there are parts of me that are being reflected back at me that I don't want to admit, right? Mm-hmm. There are parts of me that I want to ignore. There are parts of me that I hate. There are parts of me that disgust me. There are parts of me that I don't even know are a part of me, right? So how much of this world is reflected back at me, at least from a purely neurological perspective, I'd say all of it, or at least all of it that comes into my conscious awareness, right? Because anything that I perceive, that I kind of contemplate, or that comes into my awareness, that is all being processed in my brain. All these crazy things are going on that I don't quite understand. And right. I am bringing forth thoughts that I'm also paying attention to. So in a sense, it's all kind of being reflected back into me. Everything that I am.
All right, let me further narrow it. Let me further narrow it. Maybe try and personalize it just a little bit. Okay, so Nietzsche in his time, how much of his thought did he see reflected in the world? Some of it.
I'd say he saw a lot of it, right? And
reflections of himself and other people and other philosophers.
Yeah, 20 years later, when you get to World War II or World War One, then if he had stayed alive a little bit longer, then he would have seen how power and how forces kind of coalesce in the way that he's been talking about, right?
Right. But he saw it coming, and he wrote about it. To be clear.
Yeah.
But I'd also say that at the same time, it actually, in terms of what he wrote, I think it's safe to say that, he made it explicitly clear that, whether or not he saw himself reflected, that it definitely wasn't what it appeared to be or what people said it was.
Yes.
He made that much clear. That this whole song and dance wasn't what people, purported it to be. It wasn't what we had long ago formulated. It was air upon air.
It's like kind of what Emerson's talking about, and what you're talking about in this note up above here, where when you go to a new place and you go there for a while, then you come back home, you see how vile your home was, right? You see all the decadence, you see all the destruction.
Oh yeah, you can see with eyes anew. That's for sure in certain situations. Actually, it's funny, when I did a few last annotations here, I mentioned that further down in these notes. If we wind up reading it, we might not. But yeah, it's a good point. So it's kind of like when Emerson says, speak your latent conviction, Nietzsche has a lot to say about conviction, but, he's talking about a universal sense here. And he's talking about sense slang. He's talking about, our artistic, artistic endeavors and creativity. When he says the inmost becomes the outmost, at the time Nietzsche was the inmost of his time, and in time he came to be the outmost, let's say. And in that regard, I'd say Nietzsche did not see himself reflected in this world, because he said, if no one else is doing the accounting properly, let me tell you guys a few things, right? Let me show you guys a few things. And it's just like you read through it and you're just like, holy shit. How come no one else could say anything like this before that? You know what I mean? Before then. And he mapped a very particular spaces, right? He endeavored to create and shape language in a way that hadn't been previously been used before, to describe this understanding, to describe this knowledge and this wisdom and this science, honestly, because, okay, here's a funny thing. I once saw some critiques on Nietzsche because he wasn't a scientist. And it's like, first off, are you kidding me? Like, no, he was, it's like, no, he's still one of the most brilliant psychologists to date. It wasn't even his specialty. It's not even my understanding, right? Like, it's not like he was a neuroscientist or a psychologist even, or something,
He's a philologist.
Yes. Right. And in that being a philologist and the German method and a lot of other things over time, helped him develop his methods and helped him develop his own, way of reading and understanding people in the world, you could say. And that's reflected in the course of his work. And that's his science. That is Nietzsche's science. So to me, it was hilarious that he was criticizing him, because the specific criticism I'm thinking of was criticizing him for being a philosopher and not a scientist. And it's like, well, actually he was both, and you're an idiot. But never mind that. Like, if that's the thing you were to get hung up on Nietzsche on, it's like, wow, that's like, talk about missing the point. Yeah. And it's unfortunate. I've talked to other teachers before, and they've agreed with me when I've said the problem with teaching students is that by the time, like, I'm trying to point you at the sky, like, for you to see something that maybe you have or haven't seen before, or as Emerson says, naming a trait, or, as Nietzsche might say, laying the sense. I'm trying to get you to look at the sky, but, like, you're slowly lifting your head up, but you're still so busy counting the ants on the ground that you're still not seeing the sky that I'm describing. And you might think you are, but you're not, and this is, I don't know. You can look in your relationship with your.
I mean, that's Plato's allegory to the cave, right?
I guess so. It's it's inescapable as a fundamental conception of an educational process for animals. I mean, I'm open to better and different models, but there's only so much to say that actually accurately reflects us, because there are very few things that go with us and that we're okay with, fundamentally speaking. So beyond seeing your reflection or not, regardless of in-group, out-group, or any of that stuff, though, what should be immediately apparent is that what's most expected of you fundamentally is to get in line. And that goes for, like, the literal line at the grocery store, or, we've talked about this for, here and there. Culture is the domesticating force. And when it goes tyrannical and overly repressive, then it turns into the very same pathological, tyrannical forces that everyone's afraid of in the first place. It's basically like, by the time people are, trying those spells and incantations to ward off a demon, it's like, that's the process in which they summon one. In the way it works, it really does seem like spells and incantations, because whether it's the Rwandan massacre or propaganda in, National Socialist, soon to be Nazi Germany, it doesn't matter. It's like, what's always apparent is you have a throughput of propaganda, whether it's on the radio or, whatever. And so begins the process, this communication, this hypnosis process. Remember, I brought up the story my dad told about someone disbanding a lynching, kind of like, and mid to late prior, but like, late kind of mid-century America, kind of, growing pains past all that, past that stuff, kind of right in that era. And then all it took was a word to bring people to their senses. And, nowadays it'd be very different, because you'd have a bunch of people filming it, and then there's question, and then it'd be a complete coin flip of whether anyone's doing anything or not, but they're at least going to be filming it.
Yes.
Because that stuff you see that in the news on a daily basis, right? If you bother to pay attention to it, it's like, oh, someone assaulted, someone raped, and a lot of times no one does anything, because that whole part of being a good little a line getter, inner. What do you call them? The good thing about that is you can always pass you pass the responsibility on to the next bean counter or the next line getter inner.
It's like,
so,
well, I'm in the middle of the line. I'm not at the front yet.
But I mean,
so.
it's our physiology as social animals, right? Like it's very much rooted in the mud, and psychologically speaking, we have good evolutionary purposes, and we're very aware of the notion of not just that someone's watching us, but that we're aware of how that reflects on us, because that's arguably the bigger issue. Because what you can see is people don't care if they're seen, if it doesn't matter, or there's no consequence. Yet, power is thus in us animals that, if we have a reason to be ashamed, we will. And then you can question how much of that is instilled from the outside. Because my psychological theory is that, evolutionarily speaking, the long path through history, it's war with selves. They started off as these, kind of vague groups that hardly had a memory, right, amongst them, right? This is your mythology. And then, that gave further rise to those groups at war with each other, gave rise to the individual's war within themselves, and then selves versus other selves. And then further splitting that up and dividing our psyche was instinct over in socialization, and then you also have the post hoc rationalization and behavior that comes after the fact of our animal nature. Because look, as an aspect of nature that only imagines that it's separate from itself, it's very silly for us to assume that we would say fundamentally, if you're thinking if we're healthy, that would be otherwise would say anything against our existence, right? Because if you're a piece of nature made self-conscious, or stumbled into self-consciousness, then why would you speak out? What would you be other than that survival instinct self-incarnate to say, no, more of this now and forever? Maybe you build a heaven behind it. There's several approaches you can take to it.
Yes.
To kind of pad it out. But, back to the thing is that, as social animals, we are aware of those eyes. And so I guess, whether it's guilt or shame or remorse or anything that pertains to the responsibility, with our existence, implicit or explicit, it probably emerged from the social animal, becoming aware of itself within the confines of itself, bounded by other fellow social animals also becoming aware of the confines within and without themselves. Yeah. And so to my mind, as our minds articulated that, right, this might be a way, is the notion of a mind articulated itself from this formerly unseen or unheard void, it formed this ever-present I in the midst of it. And this is what actually has informed our physiology, first and foremost, above everything else. It's the material survival is actually secondary to the fact that our material survival was dependent on cohesion as social animals, right? Because that would set a precedence. And I think communication proves that. And the fact that communication can trump everything else in terms of whether or not we can kind of exist in the same tribe. Because racially, me and you are not the same, yet somehow we can kick it.
Yeah.
Right. And that goes for, a lot of people. And then you go, okay. And then for people, depending on how civilized and intelligent they are, right, they understand the benefit, because it means you can do business. It means, maybe we can benefit each other. And, maybe it's even more than transactional, maybe we even care about each other, kind of goes from there.
Yeah. And well, it's all based off of, rewards and punishment, right?
Right.
Positive stimuli, negative stimuli.
Right. Learning. And when we're aware of being under other animals' eyes, and it's not, but here's where it gets really twisted, because it's not just other animals' eyes, it's also the tiger's eye, right? It's also the eagle's eye. It's also a lot of predators' eyes. So being aware of who and what was watching you, like, it really is tied into that life or death impulse. When you see that look of an animal, when it realizes you've seen it, that's my favorite look in the world, because it's just like, we all know that look. Like, oh, someone's looking at me. I think it was a
Running
bobcat.
along.
Saw a bobcat up in the mountains a few weeks ago,
Yeah.
and it was exactly that. Because I was coming, I was clomping along up on the up ahead, up the mountain, and I happened to look down, and I'm scanning my field of vision. You know, usually it's looking for snakes, right? Rattlesnakes mainly. But sure enough, I looked down, and you know, as good as his camouflage is, it's like, man, he's pretty, and he stood out. And then I caught him, and I saw him first, and then he saw me, and then you know, it was like, you know, he should be ashamed. You know, definitely more
Yeah.
graceful than me.
Yeah, this one time I ran into a black bear when I was hiking alone.
Oh yeah, did you spook it off?
I kind of just looked at it, and I've never like seen a bear when I was alone in the woods before. So I was a little
Yeah,
scared.
depending, it might not back down. Yeah,
Well, I
but
looked
usually
him
not.
like in the eye. He looked me in the eye. And then we both kind of turned around and started walking the other way.
Yeah, okay. See that it's a civilized bear.
Yeah.
No, in that moment, you could be civil creatures, exist side by side for a moment.
Yeah.
So, right, we're aware of those eyes. It's important to know what eyes are on us. And, you know, with those eyes, like you said, it's punishment and cruelty, you know, and that comes from the judgments and the praises and the blames. And, you know, from a Nietzschean sense, and this ties in Emerson too, is that like he lays it out that remember, others cannot see, you know, they can't see your motivations. They can only see, and we'll get into motivations here in a bit too, pertaining to psychology. But, you know, that we can only, you know, we can only be praised or blamed after the fact, you know, depending on what I see of or in you, or whatever it is you're doing.
Yeah.
You know, hypothetically and theoretically speaking. So back to kind of this evolutionary thinking, you know, if those forces within and without, you know, from those forces a self emerged, you know, and this includes the splits that were like, again, consciousness of our instincts, you know, this, all these various things, you know, it winds up coming through in our religion and our philosophy and all these things, this distinct split, this notion that we hoped or wished we were minds that could be free from our bodies. And you can still see it, you know, it was formerly most prevalent in, you know, most obviously religion, right? In Christianity and Catholicism. You know, that, okay, we're going to shuffle, you know, we're going to get off this mortal coil, you know, and depending on which religion, you know, some of them, they create some sort of afterworld or overworld, or maybe a collab, something like that. If you're familiar with the Mormons.
Yes, I have a lot of friends that are Mormon.
Right.
So
that split becomes apparent, you know, and it's in our language too. A lot of our language, you know, it's referencing a self as if it's separate from a body. You know, and there's just at this point, you know, it's been in our language so long, it's, you know, it's actually like part and parcel to it, even though it's kind of nonsensical, but it's also part of the game we play. Cause you look, you know, I can say on one side, it's absurd to think that, and this, you know, you can read this elsewhere, other people have noted this, that it's absurd to see how in a species of millions and billions that we ever came to say an individual mattered. And then for the individual, it definitely feels that way. You know, this is animal physiology speaking.
yes.
No, you know, is intelligence, right? I want to live another day.
Yes.
We love life. We fear death.
I want
things
there to
like
be
that.
something after I die.
Yeah.
Life.
Yeah. More and better usually, right?
Yep.
All these things.
Yeah.
So, you know, kind of going on, you know, and I guess it maybe, you know, even in the transhumanism and the futurism, those kind of movements and ideals and ideologies, you know, like inevitably you're left with the fact that people are trying to escape their bodies, or they're trying to escape the pains of this world. You know, and a lot of times it's very sensitive people, the most sensitive, who are the most artistic, and they come with the most elaborate visions, you know, and this gets into a lot of Nietzsche's general work and critique of other thinkers and artists, you know, how, you know, either romantic and idealistic they were, or how pessimistic and nihilistic, or whatever it is they may be. You know, and this ranges from religious thinkers to, you know, more modern philosophical thinkers of his time and before.
They want the apocalypse, right? These people who don't want the body, who don't want this life because they want their afterlife. It's like Fight Club, right?
Oh yeah, it's been in the zeitgeist for a while.
Yeah.
Fight Club was part of it.
Yeah.
You remember? Do you remember? Can you remember the inescapable zombie craze that was like pop culture and all that stuff? Like the last decade or two.
So I watched The Walking Dead till
Right,
till
and
Carl
you know you
died.
see,
And it
yeah,
was
and then there
over.
was a lot of other post-apocalyptic literature and
Yes.
things, and the usual dystopian stuff, and it's become, you know, for our more sensitive people becoming very aware of it and being able to write the book on it. Let's say, you know, from Orwell back when to all these modern people, you know, I've actually heard laymen question this, go like, you know, for all these brilliant individuals, like they can see it, other people cannot. But you know, you would think that the lesson would have stuck. You know, again,
Yes.
if we go back to Nietzsche not seeing his reflection and thus edifying something here, or carving something in a mountain, you could say, that would last. You know, he used that language to describe that. You know, other brilliant and great thinkers do the same. You know, it's not necessarily just a system. You know, this is what Emerson was saying in that first paragraph, right? Why did these other men? It's not just that they wrote books or created systems. You know, it was they were the ones who created it. They were the ones who did it. They weren't following other people. You know, there's the first paragraph, right, where he mentioned just a little that we read just a little while ago.
Well, in these apocalyptic fantasies, right, when people have fantasies like a plane crashing, right, like in Fight Club, or have a fantasy of a zombie apocalypse, right, you want those things to happen because you feel dead, right, and you want to feel alive. It's like, I don't know if have you seen The Gray, the movie The Gray?
Well, yeah, sure, I've seen it, and it's got some interesting. It's got a lot of silly moments, but is a reflection of psychology, and specifically male psychology. That movie says a lot of things, actually.
Yeah, because he was on the verge of suicide.
And then Kirkman. Go on. Sorry.
Well, when the plane crashes, then all of a sudden he wants to survive, right?
Yeah, he was given a reason to live. It was just it was a need in the moment, and that's what it took actually to awaken it. You could say that's what took in the context of that movie. That's what it took to awaken his physiology to life. It took a plane crash. It took death. And that happens with a lot of people. You know, a lot of people who try and kill themselves and who survive. A lot of things, a lot of times they say their immediate first thought and feeling, realizing they weren't dead or weren't going to die, was immediate regret.
Yes.
Because it's like, now you're all messed up, you know, depending on how bad it is. And, you know, back to physiology, you know, because I guess it's, you know, Camus, for some reason, he said it. That's not the some reason. It's famous for some reason, because the notion is the only philosophical question is suicide. And it's like, no, it's temperament. The only question, it's the scientifically, the question becomes, and I don't mean this like a rationalistic bean counter to, you know, take away what romance and art there is, you know, what love there is. Right. We're not just purebred cynics here.
Just as a devil's advocate there, you know, he asked whether life is or is not worth living, or he said that the fundamental philosophical problem is suicide, because his question was, is life worth living? And his conclusion was, yes, it is. But as you've told me before, it is because it's a rebellion against life being meaningless, when I think from the Nietzschean perspective, it's more so that you affirm that life is worthwhile despite everything. It's not a rebellion. It's actually
right. Well, yeah. Can you take it as it is? Because, you know, if Nietzsche laid out, you know, if one of the biggest things he said was in the gay science, saying life is now a problem again, you know, life is a problem now. You know, the sentiment's something along those lines, the way he expressed the thought. But the sentiment is huge. It's like, okay, well, if you're telling me life is a problem now, why is it a problem?
Yes.
That's right away. You're faced with the fact of like, oh, you have no ontology. Oh, you have no metaphysics. Oh, you have no crutches to fall back on. You know, and this would be this self-consciousness, and to the degrees it's tragic self-consciousness, you know, is a degree of introspection and the temperament therein. Meaning, are you depressive? Or are you more, you know, again, or does something happen to kind of awaken you to life? Because lots of people change over time, or go from one or the other, or they go from, you know, a rut to a grave, or from a grave to life again. You know, these are stories we've been telling for a long time. and they're the mythological, right? Of course, it's old hat to say that that's reflection of the reality it embraces, because sometimes you got to know when to reinvent yourself or to get up after a fall, or sometimes, you feel almost dead, but you got to go on. And it's like, yeah, depending on how, if these are all the complaints and problems Nietzsche laid out, it's like, well, how can he be so funny? How can he clearly be having such a good time in spite of all this, or regardless of all that? And to me, it's like, that's Nietzsche's testament. That's his, I don't mean that religiously. I just mean that's part of the real standard and measure, is that rather than all these nihilistic and pessimistic thinkers of the past, from the Christians to Schopenhauer to you name it, to all and then thinkers since then, we call it the postmoderns and otherwise, who kind of get caught up playing in the muck of history.
But so Nietzsche's also being himself, right? He's affirming himself. He's bringing out his inner honesty, right, out onto the page, and with that he
put himself in the world, and now he's in the world.
Yes.
Now he put himself in the world.
Yes.
If you were to look now, he would see himself everywhere. In the meantime, so I guess moving further on with this thought back to the evolutionary perspective here, right? That all this complexity, this rising complexity, coming from the fact that we're social creatures, we're aware of our mortality and our fears and these feelings, and the way these puzzle pieces interlock. I think of like the neurochemicals in our nervous systems, right, in our brains, like the way we feed off each other, chemically and otherwise, because we never talk about or address those things. Like, it's not like I see you today and be like, oh, you're smelling, you don't see your girlfriend and be like, oh, you're friggin', what do they call them? Pheromones. Your pheromones are lovely today, honey. Like, these aren't the things we focus on. It's like, no, we put on clothes. We have names. You don't just sniff her butt. You go, oh, how was school? How was work? How was, we develop complex relationships and we play complex games. So, but I got to ask, in light of that, that evolutionary theory of that, again, us coming to be the crazy apes we are, predicated on this invisible eye in the middle of us that kind of drove us crazy and broke our brains in our physiology, at least when we get to a certain threshold with each other, I would say, in terms of when a tribe or whether a tribe gets a bad idea and it leads to their extinction, or a people, cease having a will strong enough to live. Who knows what it is that drives peoples and nations to extinction. It could be a complex, obviously it's complex when you're talking about such large moving parts. But within light of that evolutionary theory, my question for you is, what then is culture? What is it actually? We've asked this question before, but.
So when we developed civilization, right, when we developed culture, we had to learn to lie and we had to learn to act, right?
Yes.
And culture is kind of the relationship between our own self-honesty, our own passions, our own desire, our own artistic need, our own need to know, mixing and coalescing with all these lies and all these acts that we put on ourselves, that we put on society. And in a sense, they're kind of dancing along in this huge orchestra of human civilization. At least that's the way I see it.
That's a good way of putting it. Because, it's not, I guess you could say, in terms of what is culture for, a nation of 350 million people, it's not going to be any one thing. But
take Christmas, for example, right?
Well, I mean, it's the same thing that says get in line. It's definitely a blanket force. It's and part of what culture also is an evolutionary arms race, but
yes.
Back to the notion of, we don't really talk about the pheromones, being social animals, we're prone to bad ideas, whether we come up with them or get them from someone else, we're prone to bad taste and guilty conscience and excesses of pity and sympathy. I'm speaking specifically I'm thinking of Westerners here. The nature of culture and civilization likes to pretend like it's not a repressive, controlling force. But in reality, that's the cover for the arms race. It's like, well, this whole motion is to say, sure, take a number, but get in line. It's like, yes, we can address you, but only on these terms, right? You're concerned, put a complaint in the box or whatever it is that we do to send the message upwards. I mean, you think about the novelty of the suggestion box, like, I don't know, over the course of history, anything remotely resembling it.
I mean, I ranted to my boss the other day, so I suppose that could be a somewhat of a suggestion box, but more personable.
Yeah.
There's also Twitter.
Right. Well, I'd say if he's standing above you, though, he's just like, all right, well, you're trying to push shit uphill. He's like, I'm just going to stand here and you can complain, like, unfortunately, shit rolls downhill.
Yep. But yeah, there's Twitter, there's social media. I mean, that's kind of what's happening, right? It's social media has become a huge suggestion box, right, for people to put all their little complaints and all their suggestions.
That's a funny way of putting it. Yeah, it's pretty lame too. If you go, okay, this new technology, what are we going to do with it? It's going to be society's like both. It's going to be our confessional, really. That's what it's going to be. It's like, what are you going to see? Like, see what the people of the world really think and feel.
Yes.
And it's quite the show.
Put up lies.
Like lies, yeah.
And truths, or maybe distortions of the truth.
Yeah. And plenty to be embarrassed of.
Yep.
Just be glad you're not those animals. Let's see. So, it's part of the cover, right? We use camouflage too, because we can both be the predator. We can be just the eyes watching, judging. We can be the judge, jury, or executioner. We can also be the other, the outside predator or the wild predator or the wild, basically in terms of, what is a psychopath or sociopath to, would you call civilized, nice people? You might as well be looking at a monster of some sort, right? Or an animal of some sort. And the funny thing is, when it comes to those kind of harsher realities of human nature, you can see part of the modern zeitgeist. You can see it in our idealistic thinkers and our politics and all this stuff that, you can hear that a lot of people's thoughts are either we evolved past that, or haven't we evolved past this yet, or they're surprised or upset that people haven't evolved past certain things. And it tells you right away, like, oh, these people are clueless. Like, they have no idea what they're actually dealing with. Because that's part of the blanket. If they're part of the same repressive culture and they don't even realize it, then they don't even understand the same force which is being exerted on them when they replicate that in the world. They're failing to recognize both their agency in it and as well as the complete, selling out of their or lack of their agency therein. And it could be a very type of, I go, okay. So I saw, there's thinkers talking about like Noam Chomsky, a guy who comes up with the concept of manufacturing consent, basically having that discussion now on life or death matters, putting forth his own, I'm not going to, to call it propaganda makes it sound like he's disingenuous, but it just really shows you that liberalism, European liberalism turned American liberalism, aka, Christianity and Christian morals and ethics. Like all that stuff in America has jumped the Sharknado, sequel. I think they probably have a Sharknado 3 at this point. It's jumped that too. It's not a game that benefits anyone. It's just this kind of gridlock utilitarian argument on who gets a piece of the pie, and it's like you hear and see what people are saying. They're saying, yes, let each other die or kill each other. That's what people are saying right now. I think I posed a question to you many podcasts ago, or maybe it was elsewhere, but I asked somewhere in there, that, can we call ourselves truly the United States of America? And it's like, if there's a division here, it's no different than kind of what happened previously in Europe to a degree. And it's also no different than that fundamental split that comes from our psychology and our religion and, the physiology that was created in us over time, conditioned into us as citizens of, you could say, Western philosophy. Obviously we have the benefit of much more than that at our disposal as savvy, modern, adaptable creatures.
Yes. Well, really,
the free spirit has never had it better, really.
We're the children of the Enlightenment, right? We're the people who wrote the Constitution, who wrote the Declaration of Independence. They had all those Renaissance era, Enlightenment era ideas and thoughts that they put into paper, right?
So, right. And it gave, and it paved the way for all this,
Though they were certainly not enlightened. Maybe some of the people who, some of the philosophers in the Enlightenment era were.
No, there's a few. There's been a handful of what you could call enlightened men through history.
Yes.
And we're gonna get into that pretty soon with Emerson. He kind of, he actually addresses that very shortly. There's a little bit more to say on these matters. If we're talking about culture within the confines of an animal that exists within a mental confine of not just its own self-imposed limitations but those of others, right? That culture isn't just a repressive force of control; it's also protection. It's to me, it's no different than the mind or the psyche in the individual. Which is fundamentally like the organ of our skin, right? It's a semi-permeable membrane. Some things it'll keep out, other things it can't keep out. Other times, if something gets in there, it's going to make you sick, or it's going to cause a reaction, and maybe that reaction is actually necessary for your body to be strengthened. But fundamentally, culture, it's like a fortress or a cover. It's also a place to hide. It's the story we tell. And it's funny because it's dualistically a high mark which to attain, yet it's the very same leveling and domesticating force that at its worst becomes tyrannical and oppressive. And it's this force over time that the individual struggle. And this is what actually gives birth to an individual, And then, I guess I could ask you, what game does everyone play first and foremost? Like, as civilized creatures within a culture, what's the game we play first and foremost?
Tag.
That's a fun game. That's not what I'm thinking.
But we play like
aesthetics, looks.
Yeah.
If not, if not peacocking, for men and women alike, right? If not peacocking in some manner, or something that promotes the self, or something that's aesthetically pleasing, or some offshoot, right? Something in that direction, But here's the thing: as modern civilized creatures, like it's actually, it's long been in bad Christian taste and in bad liberal taste to flex your power or to be, all these other things, right? Like it's because people are afraid of power, and then for a long, so the game of Christianity over time was to equate that, or actually it's pretty apparent from the beginning, but it was to equate that weakness with purity and, these qualifying factors. If we're talking about the creator of values, someone labeling something good or bad, it's like, no, actually being strong is bad. Pain is bad. These things are bad. The meek shall inherit the earth, and on we go, and if we start going too far in that direction, then you can't tell. It's like, who said it, a Christian or a liberal? And it's like, the answer is both. They've been saying these things a long time. And because with it goes a lot of guilty conscience, with it goes a lot of pity, because everyone has those power instincts inside to a degree, at least, right? Depending on your temperament and your how you were raised in certain things.
Yeah.
A lot of
however you can, in whatever form you can.
Yeah. And so if the whole thing is if it's about presentation, if it's about aesthetics, here I am, we're saying what we're really telegraphing to each other is, here I am, look, I'm normal. I'm not a danger. I'm not crazy or insane. I'm civilized. Maybe I can do tricks. Maybe we can serve each other. Maybe I can serve you, right? You can go on down the line of what kind of interactions we as social animals have. But, within that, there's a way it benefits us. But at the same time, while it's important to be presentable, and observably and historically trustworthy. At the same time, the cultural force is to render you invisible at the same time. We've talked about Ralph Waldo Ellison's The Invisible Man before in previous podcasts. And, his mom named him, I think I've said this too, mom named him after Emerson. And he wound up going in that same vein, because I guess that was just his nature, maybe, and also his legacy. But, it's part of the biggest thing, part of the biggest benefits of culture is that it makes these things invisible, right? Yeah. If you don't have to think about things, if you don't have to name them, if you don't have to observe them, then it relegates a lot of the machinery to background noise, gives you a chance to focus on other things like specialization, right? And, we can keep going on why, as all these dynamics emerged over time from, if you can imagine us as hunter-gatherers to the present day, how all these small things change. Like you said, going to be, being a liar, wherein once upon a time we were small and close enough that most of our actions were demonstrated to each other on a daily basis. Or even thinking of the Greeks, where, reading to yourself or reading quietly would be like, that's unheard of, right? It'd be like, hey, what are you up to over there? You're being sneaky over there, right? It's very questionable. What are you doing separate from the group? What do you mean being alone? What is being alone? Like, we need you over here. You are our function, and you perform these services and these necessary things. This was you mentioning the other side of it, both the need to lie and the need to act.
Yes.
So we play this game. The game we play is that things are normal, and we play things are normal, fine, and justified.
Well, we pretend, right? I mean,
right, and I don't mean it
scathingly. We've been doing since we were kids. We've been pretending.
Right. Yeah, I don't mean this scathingly, because it's quite the art and accomplishment to do this and to do it joyfully, and to not be waylaid by all the other, slings and arrows of life and all the other things. Again, it's questions of, I guess, if there's a lot of sickness in this world, it's a question of, inoculation, right? Like I think one of my biggest inoculations was now it wasn't my dad and how he raised me and everything he showed me and all that stuff. It was also a guy like, a lot of the guys stuff I read from philosophy, but I remember Orwell. I just always remember him saying, we make the brain perfect before we blow it out.
Yeah.
That tendency in us, that desire in us, that, like join or die, the Borg,
yes.
Whatever collectivist motion we got going on.
Baptize you when you're dead.
Yeah, it's like we'll just assimilate and move on, So it really is, but it's the skin, and it's not. And again, this isn't just cynical, because there is an art to it, and you see that we forever need new and more games to play, and you see it in our need for novelty and our love of novelty, because all smart animals, like dolphins play games. Like any intelligent animal, when it gets to a threshold, it'll seek novelty. It'll seek games. It'll, you can just see it. We like to work. We like to play. Those are big for us. And there's only like eating, drinking, and mating beyond that. And other than that, like, what are we really doing that you would actually call living? Yeah. I guess, if we're leaving sleep out of the equation. All right, and when I say living, I mean like an animal in motion. Like you could any animal could recognize it as a sign of life. Like, I guess maybe it would be a force to inspire like pity or fear in another creature. Like that's what we recognize.
Yes.
So, we ended the 7th podcast in the series, and I was talking about human motives, and not just human motives, but animal motives. And I use the term animal to distinguish the evolutionary understanding of biology and psychology from our contrived values of morality and judgment. Yes, motive, the note of motive is such, it factors into morality, religion, even our law, right? If you're accused of, if you kill someone, there's a huge difference between murder one and manslaughter. Motive is huge with us.
Yes,
right?
It is.
But in this context, and strictly speaking of an animal's conscious and unconscious competing inner drives, it's a confluence of forces that competes with not just itself and it's these other drives inside of it, but with other selves. And to me, this is the crux of psychoanalytic thinking, where we ask not what was their, not like what was their motive, And we, like we're concerning ourselves with moralizing or, repressive politics. We're simply asking, what even is motive beyond religion, belief, morality, culture, and law?
And
I
what
could say,
causes a motive to emerge in the individual?
yes, motive itself would, they in the larger causal chain, you would call it a force then, because again, it doesn't emerge in a vacuum. So the motive, and I could say, okay, so what's the motive? Culture arise thus. It was a need. It filled both the need of lying and acting. But within that, there's also cooperation, and maybe you say the difference between a friend is someone you cooperate with, and you have a reason to, and then someone you don't like. If you have to cooperate with them, it feels very different because it doesn't feel like you're cooperating. It actually feels like coercion because you're otherwise I would have nothing to do with this person. Let's say you don't like someone you work with. Common complaint in the world. Like, oh, I don't like this. It's like, well, people don't even like their own families, right? Get in line, right? People don't like each other. It's old news.
Yes.
Right. But, reality is, all this conformity serves a purpose. So, beyond all these things, the motive of culture, is its purpose. It's a cyclical being and becoming, a destruction and a creation. It's kind of like if it's a river that's flowing, then this is just the ebb and flow, right? This is just the flood season and the drought. That's what we're really talking here. And the reality is behind motive, even behind whether it's an individual or a culture, its motive is not one thing. It's the name given to a larger agglomeration of forces is an individual, which is, we attribute it to their conscious will, right? If you do something and I say, why'd you do that? Like, I'm expecting you to have an answer for that, even if you don't. If you're like, I just had the whim to do it, I might get mad. Like, well, it was disrespectful. Why did you do that to me? If you don't have a good answer, because it tells me you're not taking me seriously. So you see where the stakes get really high really quickly with how this plays out in social interaction or our perceptions of one another. So we attribute motive to a conscious will, and it's the thing or person we hold to account, or that we have certain demands and expectations of. And we have these expectations whether or not that said person is conscious of the multiplicity of forces of their own will, including their instincts, their drives, their desires. Like, that we have a justice system that's blind is an unfair and absurd notion in itself, because then the notion is, oh, we're going to treat everyone the same. Well, then that's absurd. That we're going to try and look at you, or that maybe what's the notion that we're trying to look at it without judgment. And it's like, no matter how you cut it, it's insane, because it's like, wait, no, you actually need you need an insanely impeccable degree of both to remotely say that you're doing anything more than just, a script, let's say. Because otherwise it's just a psychodrama that we're enacting, because the people were guilty. Nietzsche speaks much to this, right? Whether he's saying, the person by the time you convict someone of a crime to punish them, they're not the same person they were when they committed the crime. Maybe they even regret it. And, I guess it's the same thing for the suicidal. And this gets into the physiology thing we were talking about earlier, right? The suicidal person who now wants to live is not the same person who jumped off the bridge 0.5 seconds before. And it's like, so, maybe the question is, in terms of your own physiology of, make sure you don't make those judgment calls too soon, or make sure you don't miss them as well. It's hard to say, because it really, the labyrinth really is an individual matter, dealing with your own self, your own psyche. So we're kind of moving on down here. We're almost to Emerson.
Yeah.
So I think this is a good place to start, or to not start, but to go on ahead and bring up this Nietzsche aphorism, and then that brings us on to Emerson.
Sounds good, man.
Yeah.
I'll go ahead and read it. So this is from the Gay Science.
Yes.
The Intellectual Conscience. I have always the same experience over again, and always make a new effort against it. For although it is evident to me, I do not want to believe it. In the greater number of men, the intellectual conscience is lacking. Indeed, it would often seem to me that in demanding such a thing, one is as solitary in the largest cities as in the desert. Everyone looks at you with strange eyes and continues to make use of his scales, calling this good and that bad, and no one blushes for shame when you remark that these weights are not the full amount. There is also no indignation against you. Perhaps they laugh at your doubt. I mean to say that the greater number of people do not find it contemptible to believe this or that and live according to it, without having been previously aware of the ultimate and surest reasons for and against it, and without even giving themselves any trouble about such reasons afterwards. The most gifted men and the noblest women still belong to this greater number. So this brings to mind Emerson saying that good and bad are mere words to me, right?
Right. Yeah. It's a recurring, right? A lot of Nietzsche's philosophy is actually, just, you could say, just in this vein. And
Yes.
A lot of that had to do with the, philology, the roots of words, their meaning, where they came from, what they meant in reflection of, again, evolutionary biology and psychology. He traced the lineage of what all that stuff meant in a way that was that previously hadn't been done.
Yes.
Emerson relays a similar understanding of his own account, right? We're not comparing and contrasting Nietzsche and Emerson here. We're talking about two incredibly intelligent, hardworking men here who came to their own conclusions in their own light, in their own place and time, right? Make those distinctions very clear. That was about half the aphorism, but that last part, that's the doozy. That when you can say these are not the full amounts, and at worst, they might look at you like you're crazy or say, I don't want to hear it. And then at best, what you might consider, or someone might consider best, they might cheer you on. But what you're left with, this is why Nietzsche in the same aphorism, scolds the very notion of celebrating this process, or maybe this necessity, or whatever it is you'd want to call it. That you're not understanding what's actually happening here. It's like, no, okay, the truth is harmful. It's not something to celebrate. He also expresses it in another, another aphorism when he says, we know Christianity has lost, whether it's I don't remember, it says there, it's heart or it's gusto or it's will to live, when it's no longer concerned with burning the heretics. It's like, oh yeah, you're very sedate, now. We no more stoning people, right? No more burning people.
Yes.
Right. And then it's like, okay, so
now.
Right. And the very process is like, well, by removing your own teeth and claws over time, it's like, okay, there you go. Now you cease to have relevance and power in the world. So then you see behind culture and politics that is actually the power play. Right. That's the lie all along, is that, again, like, oh, we're doing this for your own good and to benefit you and get in line and all these things. And it's like, wait a minute. And it's this perpetual cycle of, someone's asking for the power, someone's begging for it, someone's fighting for it. And then people participate in this process without recognizing what's actually happening.
Yes.
There's need.
They're
and then
sold.
What was that?
They're sold on it.
Yes. They're sold on it. They believe in it. They have faith in it. And it, depending on how, their errors in reasoning and understanding could date back thousands of years. So, there's not a guarantee that they'll necessarily find it within the course of their lifetime.
Yes.
Because it's not apparent. So I'll go ahead and finish the aphorism. But what is kind-heartedness, refinement, and genius to me, if the man with these virtues harbors indolent sentiments and belief in judgment, if the longing for certainty that does not rule in him, as his innermost desire and most profoundest need, as that which separates higher from lower men? In certain pious people, I have found a hatred of reason and have been favorably disposed to them for it. Their bad intellectual conscience still betrayed itself, at least in this manner, but to stand in the midst of this rerum concordia discourse and all the marvelous uncertainty and ambiguity of existence, and not to question, not to tremble with desire and delight in questioning, not even to hate the questioner, perhaps even to make merry over him to the extent of weariness. That is what I regard as contemptible. Like maybe we're guilty of this for being like, oh yeah, Nietzsche, he's great. And it is this sentiment which I first of all search for in everyone. Some folly or others or other always persuades me anew that every man has this sentiment as man. That is my special kind of unrighteousness. So, and this is Nietzsche playing the role of tyrant, because he's happy to be like, hard ass dad from time to time,
Yes.
Or again, the most motherly of men, right? If it's Mother Nature doing the selecting, she draws hard and clear lines, right? It's like we can dress them up, we can create art that reflects it, but at the end of the day, it's a harsh judge. Or like Nietzsche said, it's a woman and it only loves a warrior.
Yes.
And remember, what your lady demands today is not going to be the same thing she demands tomorrow. Things done today, it's not sufficient for tomorrow, and this is just this, regardless of her, it's like, this would just be you looking after your own shit, to keep one's own shit in order, right? Proverbially.
Yes.
So if Nietzsche is willing to play the role of tyrant here, it's to illustrate a very important point. In terms of we going from, these are not the weights and measures to a gay science, becoming oneself, this self-reliance, it's the need of that it's the antipode of that need and that discontent,
Yes.
And it's also an act of violence, right? As social animals, self-reliance is an act of violence. It's to say, I don't need or want you. And no one likes to feel unneeded or unwanted.
It's a declaration of war.
Yeah. And it's also the consolation prize of public opinion, right? If you go along with us, right? Like, look, you can be dependent. We have your answers, it may or may not be enough, to the discerning spirit. I know for a fact that, for Nietzsche, you could say nothing in this world was enough, right? He had to do his own. He had to create his own, and he made that much apparent.
Yes.
So, and the both sides of it, of this cultural equation serve a purpose, and then when I think of guys like Emerson, when I think of Nietzsche, it's like, and he even going back all the way to Socrates, it's philosophy as a conciliation through warfare and violence. It's like, well, I hate to thrash you guys, but it's got to be done. It's necessary. And it's even, to even realize you come to this point.
It's inevitable.
Yeah, it's okay. Yeah, no, it's inevitable, because necessary makes it sound like it's not fated. To the degree that, force equal opposite force, man.
Yes.
Something set this all in motion. You try and point to where and when it's how it started, and it's just like, oh, sure. Yeah, if you want to believe that, yes, you can believe that.
Yes. It's turtles all the way down, my friend.
Right.
So,
and then for those who must be self-reliant, there's no other way for such men to relate themselves. If you ask me what happened, I'd tell you, well, look, man, I had to figure out a way to articulate myself, because I saw that it wasn't the proper amounts. This is me being very personal with you at the moment, right?
yes.
So, and it's like, it was, looking back on my life, it was never my intent to be violent, but I recognize that that's what a lot of it is.
Yes.
No. And then for those around you, depending on the taste of your times, they won't allow for it. And then, if you can't sublimate it or make it work for you in an artistic manner, this is where we're left pondering, in what ways do the Apollonian and Dionysian tendencies, because on one side we could say it's high philosophy, at the lowest brow and common denominator we could call it politics, conservative versus liberal, and then in high-minded thinking, right, or in philosophically speaking, it's got there's its own science, and it relates more to psychology than anything else. Back to the point again.
And that kind of brings us all back to the affirmation of life, and, as Emerson says, insisting on yourself and never imitating.
Right. Right. And how do other animals affirm life? And it's like, well, it's in their motion. It's in their graces. It's in what's both good and bad about them, whether they, whether they can, even though they can't consciously articulate it in a way that we would say is like us, at least with words, words that we understand. They still express themselves, and they express it in their hunting, and they express it in everything else they do. We do the same thing. And Emerson's inclined to agree that nature doesn't lie, right? What we say, hangs, what we are hangs over us, to the point where you won't be able to hear what we say even. So
sometimes it even hacks away at us and it screams.
Oh yeah. Yeah. A bit of truth you hold. It's naughty like a child. If you don't cover its mouth, it'll scream. So it's probably one of my favorite lines in all literary history right there for Nietzsche. So we were on Emerson's kind of numbered list on his ideal, on his prophecy of self-reliance, on his fate and dictum.
Yes. We're starting off at number 4.
Let me just read one last point to reiterate here, because from number 3, right before that, there's this interesting part where, okay. I think we're good. We already talked about in the very first paragraph we read, rather than the recent one, where he mentions inflexibility, and it was in the same Nietzsche aphorism we read. That was from last week.
Yes.
But, he talks about it, and this is coming from inflexibility as a virtue, as antipode to the dishonesty of a time and place and culture. Carry us forward.
As our religion, our education, our art look abroad, so does our spirit of society. All men plume themselves on the improvement of society, and no man improves. I'm just going to go ahead and read this next paragraph, just because that one's so short. Mm-hmm. Society never advances. It recedes as fast on one side as it gains on the other. And that's kind of Nietzsche saying that as soon as an ideal is created, it's already a retrograde movement, right?
Yeah.
It undergoes continual changes. It is barbarous. It is civilized. It is Christianized. It is rich. It is scientific. But this change is not amelioration. For everything that is given, something is taken. Society acquires new arts and loses old instincts. What a contrast between the well-clad, reading, writing, thinking American with a watch, a pencil, and a bill of exchange in his pocket, and the naked New Zealander whose property is a club, a spear, a mat, and an undivided 20th of a shed to sleep under. But compare the health of the two men, and you shall see that the white man has lost his aboriginal strength. If the traveler tell us truly, strike the savage with the broad axe, and in a day or two the flesh shall unite and heal as if you struck the blow into soft pitch, and the same blow shall send the white man to his grave.
I think it's hilarious. Thinking about it now, it's hilarious because it's like, now it's like, well, you don't even have to hit them. Just, say a word that they think is mean, and they'll just crumble, and maybe want to destroy you,
Yeah. Yeah. Imagine hitting someone today. Yeah. Yeah. No, today people are so weak. We essentially, words can be magic these days. They are truly sticks and stones these days. You can say something and completely destroy someone. You can crumble them. You can make their entire career just fade into the wind, right? You can send them on the streets, starving to death.
Talk about power.
Yeah.
I guess power and mob justice is the reason why Nietzsche found public opinion detestable. Because then it's like, especially coming from the people of the culture, because it's like, if you're complaining of the culture is the problem, and you're of the culture, it's like, at what point in there, are you exempt? Again, it's the notion of, if there's an invisible eye in the middle, then all the apes that are on the outside of the circle are pointing their fingers at each other.
Yeah.
And there's that eye in the middle that's regulating.
Yes.
And what do you call it? It's playing the mediator. and then you think of the degrees that you play media, because I question sometimes, do you call it an inner dialogue or a monologue? Because, dialogue implies there's someone or something else in there, right? This is when I say
Yes.
our language itself betrays this dualistic thinking, or this notion that we actually believe we're separate from our bodies. And I think a lot of people who might not think that they might think that they don't believe it, but they in fact believe it in a way that would surprise them, because it's actually how their physiology was formed, or that's how their self was created to a point, if that makes sense.
Well, yeah. Well, we started talking to each other, right? So that's why it's an internal dialogue, because when we talk
Right.
in
It
our
starts as a
minds, it
monologue
feels
in
like we're
theory.
talking to someone else, right?
Right. Or that shortly I can turn a monologue into a dialogue. So
Yes.
both actually seem correct. But if you were to ask me, is there actually someone else in there? Do you have like is there a Socrates demon in there? Is there an angel or a devil in there?
I think there is a whole conglomerate of forces in there, right?
Yeah, a universe reflected therein, right?
Yes.
Let's see. Yeah.
I'll move on to
No,
this
no
next
wonder
one just
people,
because
get confused.
it
Yeah,
it it kind of continues this thought that he's having.
sure.
The civilized man has built a coach, but has lost the use of his feet. He is supported on crutches, but lacks so much support of muscle. He has a fine Geneva watch, but he fails of the skill to tell the hour by the sun. A Greenwich nautical almanac he has, and so, being sure of the information when he wants it, the man in the street does not know a star in the sky. The solstice he does not observe, the equinox he knows as little, and the whole bright calendar of the year is without a dial in his mind. His notebooks impair his memory, his libraries overload his wit, the insurance office increases the number of accidents, and it may be a question whether machinery does not encumber, whether we have not lost by refinement some energy, by Christianity entrenched in establishments and forms some vigor of wild virtue. For every Stoic was a Stoic, but in Christendom, where is the Christian?
Right. Or you think of Nietzsche. Oh,
Yes.
right. One Christian, he died on the cross. There's like that, I guess repeated over time.
There's so much in this paragraph that is extremely just amplified in the modern day.
Right.
We
Also a lot.
socialize on social media, so we don't know how to talk to each other anymore, right?
Oh yeah, no, I definitely question. I wonder, back to the question of technology affecting our physiology, right? It's been important to the conversation for the course of this podcast. That line of thought is going like, yes, how much does it affect and retard children? To have this much of their reality delegated to a screen versus this much time, playing with the other fellow animals, and face to face and communication and all that. It's like I couldn't tell you. I don't socialize with younger people, so I couldn't tell you how much it's affected them over time. I mean, I kind of, I know, I see and make my observations and try and do what measurements I can to understand the magnitude and the changes and all that. But it looks pretty big.
It's huge. I mean, I'm socially awkward, so.
Yeah, but again, that's kind of the point of culture, though, right? It's to throw you off, to where if you're not in line, that's the point. It's to throw you. It's saying, okay, like you can stand firm, like over here in this manner. But if you choose to stand over there, if you choose to assert yourself, then we might have some problems.
Yes. Slavery with extra steps. But so he says, for every Stoic was a Stoic, but in Christendom, where is a Christian, right? We kind of brushed on this at the beginning of this, but like you could say that, but most people, I mean, I'd say most people who look at Stoicism and they like Stoicism, they actually aren't Stoics, right? So it's a nice comparison, right? A real burn on Christianity, but at the same time, this happens with a lot of stuff. Most people don't live their philosophy. Most people look at these philosophies and they don't act on them, but instead they let them flood their mind so that they have this perception that they're living these philosophies because they're so.
Well, that's why Nietzsche poked a hole in. for the modern stoical attitude being like, okay,
Yeah.
how much broken glass and scorpions you have to swallow,
Yes.
you know, to convince yourself here that and to, you know, temper your stomach, or however he words it
Yes.
in that aphorism. I think that's in the gay science too. But I think, you know, when he's capital S Stoic, he's talking about the Greeks, you know,
Yes.
so think of the contrast, you know, we're talking Greeks from, you know, 2,500 years ago, roughly, you know, and then, you know, Christendom, where is a Christian, you know, 2,000 years ago, you know, we could see the Stoics and the Stoicism, and then we're going, okay, and then he's asking right now, where have the Christians been in Christendom? You know,
Yes.
absent is what he's been saying. You know, and I'll say this, you know, the more significant thing about the criticisms and this, because, you know, I think, you know, the modern answer is like, again, it's what do you call it? Not just diffusion of responsibility and all these other things, but not just specialization, not just being, you know, for those who like to complain or, you know, it's, you know, for those who do take I'm not going to say cynical take on it, but, you know, for those who do have that mindset of, oh, this is slavery, and those who are fully cynical or jaded or whatever it may be, you know, how they view culture, society, government, you name it, right? One sec. Is that, you know, an easy argument would be that, well, what point do we need? Why do we need to know the solstice? Why do we need it? What's the point of knowing time and all these other things? And it's like, you know, our life is you know, I guess we don't think about it necessarily numerically all the time, but it's like our life is largely scheduled and measured by time. We think in terms of time, you know, at least here in in Western culture, where, you know, there's a day-to-day routine and
factory bell.
Yeah, all that stuff, right? So, you know, it's huge to say that man has no calendar, you know, and even though the calendar reflects a profundity of the natural world, and that's that you need to know when to harvest, right? You need to know when to hunt. You need to know when to gather your food. And it's abstracted out into this thing where it's like, yeah, I'll plan something for Tuesday. And it's like, why? Because someone else grew the food, so you don't have to pay attention to the solstice. Now you got this whole other calendar thing to pay attention to. And it's like, but it's not necessarily a given that anyone does that. If that makes sense. Right.
Yes.
It's like now everyone can be a farmer in their own right. Right. So the specialization in labor was, again, to me, it's just more of a dispersal of power amongst, you know, what originally started as tribal people evolved into civilizational people, you know, in the sense that humans once existed in small tribes, but we're not, you know, to call us just a tribal species at this point in time, you know, forgets the fact that we're a civilization building species at this point in time.
Yes.
You know, that's at this point, the utilitarianism of the civilization so far has won out over the tribalism of the smaller groups. But you see how these warring factions go to war within our larger culture.
Yes.
So before we get too further on that tangent, you want to go on and we can keep going.
There is no more deviation in the moral standard than in the standard of height or bulk. No greater men are now than ever were. A singular equality may be observed between the great men of the first and of the last ages, nor can all the science, art, religion, and philosophy of the 19th century avail to educate greater men than Plutarch's heroes 3 or 4 and 20 centuries ago. Not in time is the race progressive. Phocion, Socrates, Anaxagoras, Diogenes are great men, but they leave no class. He who is really of their class will not be called by their name, but will be his own man, and in his turn, the founder of a sect.
Oh, hold on, pause right there. The best subject matter, like, so that right there, that's a loaded, like, you know, you do a podcast on that one sentence right there.
Yes.
And for the best illustration of this, it was somewhere in the first, I want to say like 1 to 5 or 8 episodes of the Nietzsche podcast, but you know, where he's talking about Nietzsche's conception of the philosophers as archetypes. You know, those old philosophers that they weren't the philosopher as you think of him as a man of systems and governance and that kind of thing. They were, you know, as what do you call it? Yeah, just as more like archetypes themselves, right? Like they were a representation of a possibility or a potential
Yes.
of a great thinker.
They
You know,
played a
and
role.
yes, exactly. Even though they leave no class, because that's an important distinction. It's huge to say, it's like, yeah, how could have Diogenes could not have left a class, yet we still remember him, even though he didn't. But again, if you're of his when he's saying if you're of their nature, he's saying if you're of the same archetype, if you're of the same blood, if you're the same, if you have the same needs. We've been discussing these things all along, especially in this episode. You'll probably hear it clearer on a re-listen. Me too, for that matter.
Well, and people will want to stand in line, right? When
yes,
Jesus
better
dies,
technology.
people want to stand behind that cross. When Nietzsche dies, some guy on the Nietzsche subreddit is going to say, "I want to start a Nietzsche revolution," right? I don't know if you remember that, but some dude was on there and he's like, "Hey, I want to start like a cult or like a Nietzsche cult or whatever."
Oh, brilliant.
And I'm just thinking, okay, man. Yep, just stand in line.
Yeah. Okay. My question is it more Manson-esque or more Kaczynski-esque? I guess we'll know. I guess because Kaczynski was more self-reliant, whereas Manson was the cult of personality. But to me, again, see, I see that as the Apollonian Dionysian split. In the American psyche, two different men produced by the same experiment by the government. It's just a really fascinating case study in human psychology. Yeah. And I knew. Okay, here's another sign. If anyone can hear this, I knew liberals had jumped the Sharknado in America when I heard a liberal say that Kaczynski called the kind of the Kaczynski approach and attitude, which was also the Fight Club attitude, fascist. Because then it's like, no, they might be working together. Solo or together, it's like regardless, what they're actually doing is they're trying to go back to anarcho-primitivism. It's the ultimate liberalism, right? The ultimate liberalism is to go back to the way things were supposedly. So it's like, and this is also how I kind of think of the dichotomy in Nietzsche. It's like he became nature's ultimate conservative by way of being nature's ultimate liberal, because it was only through being open to that exploration, right? That Dionysian romp through, again, his own mind, his own understanding, his own codification and articulation of himself to others, what he saw in this world.
Do you think, in a sense, Nietzsche and Emerson, maybe they kind of harness the camel, the lion, and the child all at the same time?
Yeah, because it's a question of what you do with it. It's like, okay, because you say the difference is that a camel is not a fighting animal. It can spit, like it'll spit. It's got like this irritant in its spit. Like it's a way worse experience. Like it's a worse experience than like it would sound if you're thinking of like, oh, this animal can maul your face off versus this animal can spit. It's like, it's a worse thing than, you might think. It stinks. It's real nasty. Yeah. But at the same time,
people can lie to you. People can shun you. People can tell mean words, right?
Yeah. It varies in us too, the approach. But this is the interesting thing. Emerson, moving forward with the essay here. I'm going to go ahead and read the next part.
Yeah, go for it.
Wait. Actually, we stop on the? Oh no. We're
at the arts and inventions of each period, or only its costume.
Right. The arts and inventions of each period are only its costume and do not invigorate men. The harm of the improved machinery may compensate its good. May compensate its good. Hudson and Bering accomplished so much in their fishing boats as the astonished Perry and Franklin, whose equipment exhausted the resources of science and art. Galileo, with an opera glass, discovered a more splendid series of celestial phenomenon than any one since. Columbus found the New World in an undecked boat. It is curious to see the periodical disuse and perishing of means and machinery, which were introduced with loud laudation a few years or centuries before. The great genius returns to essential man. We reckon the improvements of the art of war among the triumphs of science, and yet Napoleon conquered Europe by the bivouac, which consisted of falling back on naked valor. I know it's pretty badass, right? And disencumbering it of all aids. The emperor held it impossible to make a perfect army, says Las Casas, without abolishing our without abolishing our arms, magazines, commissaries, and carriages, until, in imitation of the Roman custom, the soldier should receive his supply of corn, grind it in his hand mill, and bake his bread himself. Right. So it actually to find strength in this example, Emerson's quotation of Las Casas is to go back almost, some 2,000 years from his place in time to go, okay, where were they most strong, let's say, or where was the strength and will most powerful? And it's like, here's a good example, right, of that at a point in time. Look at what they did with so little. And like I said, this is the most interesting thing about history and culture is over time, we say, you look how impressive it is. And then yet Emerson says, yes, before you, get up on the smell of your own farts too much, that remember in short order, all these things we thought were so great not too long ago are utterly forgotten, or maybe they're happily forgotten or willfully forgotten.
Yes. And while they sound great, may not be as great as they seem, at least in the time being, right? They weren't as great when the time was now, right? It's funny. I mentioned Life of Brian in the last episode, and so there's this one scene in there where the leader of the Judeo's People's Front, he's saying, he's writing like this declaration of war almost against the Romans. And he's saying, I hate everything about the Romans except for the aqueducts. And then some dude's like, but what about civilization? And then they keep like mentioning all these like long lists of things that they like about the Romans. And then it's like, because a civilization.
Oh, dude, aqueducts. They were the cleanest people of their time and place. Yes. And if you can imagine how dirty we were back, how dirty things were, even with the sewage system and all the rest of it. It's like, that was a clear distinction. Of course, you thought like it's a clear distinction of hell yeah, we're better than all these other people. Look how dirty they are.
Yes.
We have running water.
Yes.
We're civilized.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's culture speaking, right? Superiority asserting itself. Again, back to the notion of a creature, an aspect of nature asleep to that fact, yet imagining that it's conscious of that fact, just to go like, run its mouth and be like, yeah. And then it's like, of course you'd say that, right? It's logical, psychoanalytics. Well, it almost winds up that past all the confusing, complicated stuff. Like it really does. Like eventually we simplify ourselves. Like over time, like the wisdom is condensed and knowledge is condensed,
and it's refined.
Yes, and we've made quite a few strides. We still have a long ways to go here, but we made quite a few strides, so that's good.
Well, I always flirt with the idea of getting rid of my iPhone and getting a flip phone, right? And then I start thinking, well, but I need maps, right? And I'll be like, but I also like Spotify. And wait, what if I want to take a picture? And then
but it's part of the arms race. You're competing with a lot of people around you. Like part of that is technology. If you can imagine that if tomorrow, like it's been like this with all technologies. Think of like with nuclear, right? In terms of if nations didn't embrace, the nuclear arms race, it's like, well, they were no longer a concern for the actual world stage and the politics and the warfare compared to the nations that were doing business and such, right? So it's like, that's just technology. It's going to apply to everything, just about everything we do. It's like a lot of times you can try and avoid it. You're just going to be, you might just be gimping yourself, but it does depend because sometimes, maybe you might be better off grinding your corn in a hand mill, because, Emerson doesn't promise. He says the harm of the improved machinery may compensate. It's not a promise, not a guarantee.
He knows better. That brings us on to the next.
Oh, and he also says, remember, he says society is not progressive, and this is I know this is just, it's an apocalyptic message for anyone who's still beholden to the liberal nightmare, let's say. But, they can dream of heaven for maybe another 2,000 years like the Christians did. It'll be some ultimate utilitarian paradise, I guess.
Yes. Where the machines do everything.
Well, I mean, now we're getting it, but this is the Matrix territory.
Yeah, exactly.
And then, but okay, let me run with this for a second because I've talked about this before, but not specifically here. And see, I think the genius of the Matrix, it wasn't the red pill, blue pill stuff even. It was the larger story arc as a modern human mythos. And that stuff is actually really hard to do, right? Like it's hard to retell a story that's actually relevant or actually speaks to human nature on a deep and profound yet simple allegorical manner, right? It's what makes Zarathustra mean anything, let's say. And so much for the rest of the holy books in their forms and format. But
Yes.
within that mythos, it was that humanity created the perfect slave. The perfect slave fought back, instead enslaved humanity. It knew nothing more than how its creator produced it and what its creator showed it.
Yes.
Right. So what could it do but follow suit? And then within that, it puts what the created puts the creator to sleep. And now the creator is the perfect slave. And what's messed up about it is, so I think, they missed on the execution, but the premise in the mythos is solid, is that the machine itself actually is the problem. It's like the machine was the problem. It was the anomaly. And it cannot fix itself because it cannot necessarily see or approach itself. And it winds up requiring a human to go into the system to fix the virus that destroys both the machinery and the people. And if you remember, did you see the whole series? Because if you did, then it was what's his name? Agent Smith, right? And Agent Smith is like Big Brother's bean counter, really. That's who he is. He's going,
you already know
humanity's
that
a
from
virus.
the first movie. I didn't watch the
Oh
the
yeah,
other
yeah,
ones.
yeah, yeah. You don't have to, but the premise is yes. So because it doesn't end. Like it wasn't a happy ending. The humans aren't freed. They're still slaves. It's just a cycle that repeats, and that the machine must learn to accept the human again, or else there's war, else there's destruction. And this is history. It's like unless the larger powers that be can make accommodations for human nature as we are, not necessarily as you may coerce us, let's say, whether it's into a camp, and that could be any kind of camp, fat camp, gay camp, so we're talking about the coercive nature of people in society, right? We've been over this a million times at this point. It should be clear, because it's not meant in that cheap, cynical way of, I guess, when people think of teenagers reading Nietzsche, it's kind of like that, blindly defiant, but, we're not talking about anything like that. We are well beyond that.
Yes, we are. It's not high school anymore.
So yeah, I thought they and they didn't even realize what they did, or their gene, I think they mistook it. And and that's fine too. And not many other people really saw it because people didn't like the execution and the rest of the story. And it's kind of irrelevant anyway. But like I said, it's just a fundamental notion of, well, that's exactly it. You create a system and you realize, oh shit, it's causing more harm than good.
Yeah.
Oh, look, like we built all these prisons, more harm than good. Oh, look, we've turned the nation into wage slavery, and it hasn't kept up with the cost of living and inflation and all these other modern problems. Like, whoops, on and down the line of the list. These are modern, very like these problems will date the podcast, let's say, but the proverbial problem is ever present. Back to Emerson, it's not progressive. These are all stopgap solutions.
Yeah. Well, so I mean, what is the Matrix speaking to here? It's speaking to that we create tools, we create things that we believe are advancing us, and those things enslave us.
Yes. And then you can also think of it from, if you remember from Zapp's essay, The Last Messiah, him talking about, certain technologies are just objectively good. You think of scissors for cutting, right? It's a brilliant little device. But then the example he uses, and this is what modern people, like, they're not, like, I guess they're so far, maybe that's the notion of we're so far removed, modern people, they're so far removed from their instincts that they immediately want to defend why it's not this way. But Zapp would say something like, a plane is a terrible device to the degree that it robs you of, let's say, maybe in the modern context, might make more sense. It's like a road trip. In the old days, it would be like, no, you don't want to hike through the jungle. It's like, no, you want to fly over it, right? But it's like, well, hiking through the jungle would have been quite the feat. Like you'd have at least felt alive while doing it.
Yes.
Right. It wouldn't be a distraction. It wouldn't be a repression. Like you could watch people falling down and hurting themselves on your phone while on the plane. So it's like, many moving parts going on at once.
Yes. All right, let's move on to this next little. Society is a wave. The wave moves onward, but the water of which it is composed does not. The same particle does not rise from the valley to the ridge. Its unity is only phenomenal. The persons who make up a nation today, next year die in their experience with them. So this kind of goes on to the, like, how, we're always kind of moving forward. Everything's always changing. The present dies, and now we got the future.
Right. And then you see how people remember and forget certain things over time.
Yes.
And, and we don't necessarily know what we're losing or what we're changing. And we don't necessarily know that it's going to be good or bad, and it's something to keep in mind as we continue marching forward into whatever this future world we're building here is.
Yeah. And at the end of the day, all you have is the present and all you have is yourself, right? And I think that's also a point that he's making here.
Right.
Is that you're a particle on the wave and you're always going to be a particle on the wave. And at some point in time, something else is going to be that particle on the wave, and
right,
you're going to be no more.
Right. And I think he's more or less, he's just describing a phenomenon. It's not so much like you could tell he's not cynical about it. He's not, he's not being depressive or prescribing in a morose way.
Yes.
It's an observation. Because it speaks to the need for regeneration and renewal. And this goes back to earlier in the essay, him speaking positively about children and childhood, right? Going like, hey, this is actually necessary. The same thing that on one side, culture, hems children in and kind of beats it out of them, but it's also necessary.
Yes.
And then
it's necessary.
Right. It's like the change is necessary. And then also, a cultural memory is also necessary.
Yeah. And
that's what we've seen so far.
That's history class, right?
Right.
That's learning about the Declaration of Independence. That's learning about the Constitution.
Right. And it's like, well, what if you can't celebrate your history? What if you can't even agree on your history? It's like, well, okay, in step more modern problems.
Yes.
That's its own podcast too. Yes. Shall we go on?
Yeah. And so the reliance on property, including the reliance on governments which protect it, is the want of self-reliance. Men have looked away from themselves and at things so long, they have come to esteem the religious, learned, and civil institutions as guards of property, and they deprecate assaults on these because they feel them to be assaults on property. And as a side note, they feel these things to be assault on themselves.
Yes, the association of themselves with the property, you're as if you're the one doing honor. It's like, no, you're stealing honor, right? Or you're grave robbing, or you're taking from someone else's culture or some other thinker's treasures.
Exactly.
Go on.
They measure their esteem of each other by what each has and not by what each is. But a cultivated man becomes ashamed of his property out of new respect for his nature. Especially he hates what he has. If he see that it is accidental, came to him by inheritance or gift or crime, and he feels that it is not having, it does not belong to him, has no root in him, and merely lies there, because no revolution or no robber takes it away. But that which a man is, does always by necessity acquire, and what the man acquires is living property, which does not wait the beck of rulers or mobs or revolutions or fire or storms or bankruptcies, but perpetually renews itself wherever the man breathes. Thy lot or portion of life, said the Caliph Ali, is seeking after thee. Therefore, be at rest from seeking after it. Our dependence on these foreign goods leads us to our slavish respect for numbers. The political parties meet in numerous conventions, the greater the concourse, and with each new uproar of announcement, the delegation from Essex, the Democrats from New Hampshire, the Whigs of Maine, the young patriot feels himself stronger than before by a new thousand of eyes and arms. He has this, as a side note, he has a protection from the herd, right? The weak find more power in the strong, right? Because they're a part of something bigger than themselves, and that gives them strength.
Yes. And then the weak help justify the strong.
Yes, exactly. In like manner, the reformers summon conventions and vote and resolve in multitude. Not so, O friends, will the God deign to enter and inhabit you, but by a method precisely the reverse. It is only as a man puts off all foreign support and stands alone that I see him to be strong and to prevail. He is weaker by every recruit to his banner. Is not a man better than a town? Ask nothing of men, and in the endless mutation, thou only firm column must presently appear, the upholder of all that surrounds thee. He knows that power is inborn, that he is weak because he has looked for good out of him and elsewhere, and so perceiving, throws himself unhesitantly on his thought, instantly rights himself, stands in the erect position, commands his limbs, works miracles, just as a man who stands on his feet is stronger than a man who stands on his head.
And again, I'm thinking of physiological matters here.
Yes.
Not just earlier, the notion of the physiological matters of, let's say, the reaction of someone who assumes your assault on property is assault on them, whether that's, real or imagined, let's say.
Yes. And well, so he's also speaking to something else here. He's kind of speaking to this the whole time, but is not a man better than a town, right? And you could easily replace that with, is not a man better than his property, is not a man better than what he associates himself with, is not a man better
Right.
than his ideas.
Well, there's no town without the man.
Yes, exactly.
Like, what's the point of a town without a man? And it's kind of like on philosophy, there's a corollary question where I asked you, what's the point of being present in this world and in this life if you see that so many people want to check out? It's a strange thing. Exactly. It's a strange urge, but we're strange animals, so it's not surprising.
But we do value towns more than we value individuals. We value governments more than we value individuals. We value.
Yeah, it was a cross wire. Well, I mean, it's an error, like many errors in our philosophy. Like if people don't understand it, they don't understand it. It's not to put the self on a pedestal like it's some magical creature. That's not the point. It's understanding that, we all play our part. We're all just one more, it doesn't need any grand explanation. It doesn't need any systematic philosophy to understand that at the end of the day, we're one more animal down on the farm.
Yes. Yeah.
So let's see. So as I read from Caliph Ali here, is seeking after thee, therefore be at rest from seeking after it. I meant to ask you this earlier, but I think I told you before. You correct me if I'm wrong, but I think I told you that I've written and read a lot on and off through the years, but I think I've told you like I've had probably like a whole year, maybe even years where I didn't write or read much at all.
Yeah, you've told me.
Yeah, and some of those were some of the best years of my life. I was doing other things and busy with other things, and it's like, and I guess what I'm saying is like, if and when a time comes to change things up, do something new, or something else demands a spontaneous expression of you, or you must figure something out for yourself, whatever that may be, yeah, like sometimes there's a time to dive in, or maybe there's also a time to quit or a time to leave too.
Yeah, and that's the thing, right? You need to do what's best for you in any given moment, right? Because like if I'm like writing because I write and I think it's a chore, then I shouldn't be writing, right? I should be doing something else. If I'm doing this podcast and I think it's a chore, I shouldn't be doing the podcast. I should be doing something else.
Right. It's that's definitely a matter of attitude right there.
Yeah. And other things are demanding you, and you're not going to do your best when you're feeling like it's a chore, right?
Right. And I'd say what's if we're talking about constituent forces, it's like, well, what is in you? What's in you to even have this desire, supposedly have this desire, if it's something you supposedly want to do, and then to go against it. You could argue that maybe it was a false desire to begin with. Like, oh, you didn't want to do a podcast, you just wanted to X, right? I don't know what it might be.
Yes.
It's just this aspect of human psychology, right? It's like, how often do we say the things we mean, or how often is it ever just a cover for something else?
Yes.
Or, maybe sometimes it's only even what do you call it? It's like, oh, this is only just partial opinion. I'm not telling you everything.
Yeah, and you have to make room for other stuff too in life, right? I mean,
absolutely. I'm a big proponent of experimentation and new habits. Trying new habits, maybe milking them for all they're worth and abandoning them, right? Trying new and different things.
Yep.
To the idea of just living your life the same day in, day out. I can't comprehend that. You know what I mean? Like tit for tat, it's like experiment.
Yeah. You got to open the backpack, right?
Yeah. Take a swig. What's in? Don't even ask. Just take a swig now. Right. So where are we in the did you read
I read that whole big paragraph.
Yeah. So I think we're at the very last one then.
Yep.
I thought so. Yep.
So use all that is called fortune. Most men gamble with her and gain all and lose all as her reel rolls. But do thou leave as unlawful these winnings and deal with cause and effect, the chancellors of God. In the will, work and acquire, and thou hast chained the wheel of chance, and shalt sit hereafter out of fear from her rotations, a political victory, a rise of rents, the recovery of your sick, or the return of your absent friend, or some other favorable event raises your spirits, and you think good days are preparing for you. Do not believe it. Nothing can bring you peace but yourself. Nothing can bring you peace but the triumph of principles.
It's pretty fun. It's funny though. You think good days are preparing for you. Do not believe it. It's like that's pretty cheerful.
Yeah. But it keeps your expectations low, right?
No, well, I think it's more like, I'm not going to say showing contempt for something like a contrite optimism.
Yeah.
But I think that's what more or less what he's really doing here.
Yeah.
He's just saying because I go, yeah, if that's your hope, like, if that's kind of your hope and dream on a day-to-day basis, it's kind of that bit that much of a whimsy.
Well, when the sun's shining, you know that the next thing, the next kind of weather that's going to come is rain or snow, right?
Right. It logically follows. But I guess it was earlier on. We didn't read it today. We read it last time. But I want to say it's somewhere in like section 2 or 3 of the, above paragraphs.
Yeah.
Where, what is it? He says something like, here, I'll go ahead and just scroll up. I couldn't remember which, or I don't know where exactly it is in there. It's a lot.
This is a good time to say all my ads. We're we're sponsored by Emerson. He gave forth his wisdom to us, and we're sponsored by Nietzsche, who wrote with blood, and gave forth his wisdom to us through his many works, through all the misinterpreted and very vague, poorly done YouTube videos that are online. And of course, by the awesome, wonderfully done Nietzsche podcasts that I sometimes listen to. Anyways, that was just a little segue. Just a little gratitude for all the things that have kind of gone into this project that we've been doing here. And of course, with your own passion, Mynaa, you've really kicked in gear with the notes that you've been doing.
Oh yeah, well, it's
we have 49 pages of notes.
We should probably should have read more, but that's okay too. That's
right.
I'm looking at them right now going like, okay, is there something in here we should mention or that we already haven't to a degree?
Well, let's go.
Oh no, there's a few more things, of course.
The thing is, nothing can bring you peace but yourself. And when I'm like throwing out all these points of gratitude for all these other stuff, yeah, in a sense, I have partially relied on these philosophers. I've partially relied on Plato. I've relied on Nietzsche. I relied on Emerson to give me wisdom, right? But at the end of the day, I'm the one who discerns or perishes, right?
Right.
I'm the one who makes the decisions. I'm the one who brings peace to myself, not the rain outside. Or
you'd asked about self-reliance, right? And I said, I mentioned the song again, becoming increasingly aware, right? The invisible spoon, plate, and the feeding hand.
Exactly. And yes, while most things kind of pass through our field of vision, like your artist friend was saying, some things do stand out. And in today's day and age, you really need to stand out in order to make a difference, right? But
or get anyone's attention. It's loud. People are loud.
Yeah, but you don't want to, like, as a person who wants to be self-reliant, you don't want to just go willy-nilly to anything that just is brighter than all the other stars, right? You want to pay attention to all of them, so that way you can discern which one is the one that will give you peace, or the one that will give you more power, right?
I don't know, Scientology.
Yeah, of course.
It's pretty convincing.
Yeah, well, I mean, that's the thing with that. That's if you fall into the realm of Scientology, then something was brought to your attention. Scientology,
right? Well,
right?
something at least resonated, right? To catch their, like, because it's easy to judge and go, okay, how could this person fall for this or that? This cult or another cult or that cult, right? Or religion, even, right? It doesn't matter.
Well, it's like alt rock, right?
Yeah, and it's well, you're asking what needs are being fulfilled. It's a question of what needs are being fulfilled and what are their own motives, and depending on what they're offered, and any promises made there, and it's like, well, of course, it's gonna be very tempting. It's pretty natural that people want to follow. And it's like, hey, you explain to me the name of the game, and if I think I can follow, and it's to my benefit, you see that through history, most people will.
Yeah, or they'll forget how to play.
Right, and then if the games at present suck, then it's a matter of creating new and better ones.
Yes. And so, kind of as a final question to you, Mynaa, kind of to end off this series. So how can someone be self-reliant in a world where everything is specialized? We're relying on everything else every day. We're treated as numbers. We're being like everyone's just a bean counter, right? That's standing in line. How do we be self-reliant?
Well, I read the other day some verses written by an eminent painter which were original and not conventional. The soul always hears an admonition in such lines, let the subject be what it may. The sentiment they instill is of more value than any thought they may contain. To believe your own thought, to believe that what is true for you in your private heart is true for all men, that is genius. Speak your latent conviction, and it shall be the universal sense, for the inmost is in due time becomes the outmost, and our first thought is rendered back to us by the trumpets of the last judgment. Familiar as to the voice of the mind is to each, the highest merit we ascribe to Moses, Plato, and Milton is that they set not at books and traditions and spoke not what men, but what they thought. Not but what men thought, but what they thought, right? You're taking the path of men and from men, but not to men, right? This is, Nietzsche says you're taking man is, something to be overcome. He's not a goal, right? You becoming self-reliant is, in fact, I would say it's you becoming more than a man. Like a man is a function of the herd, generally speaking.
Yes.
He's disposable, right? And you don't remember him because you're not supposed to remember him. Not at books and traditions, and spoke not what men thought. A man should learn to detect and watch that gleam of light which flashes across his mind from within, more than the luster of the firmament of bards and sages, right? I think a lot of this is, people they make the mistake of having heroes or putting people way out of their reach and things way out of their reach. And, maybe it's part of the mediation process of like shame and standards and, we're trying weights and measures here, right? The value systems going, of course, if you fall short of an ideal, you might feel ashamed of that, but then it's a question of, is it your ideal? Because if it's not your ideal, I'm questioning who installed it. And if it's not your shame, then whose shame is it? So there's all these healthy instincts within us. The instincts are there. The possibilities are there. It's some of the most basic stuff in modern psychology is getting the sick patient to understand that the resources are within. It's just a matter of getting them to tap into it. Self-reliance is fundamentally no difference. To me, it's absurd that the notion of you could think of like the psychologists themselves as there to help a creature be that way, because it's generally a one-on-one process or a small group process, right? Because you can't, it's hard to run therapy on large numbers of people. At that point, you think you call it brain. You don't call it therapy. You would call it brainwashing or something, or education system. I don't know, right? Call it something else. But that's a mediation process to say, okay, what's aberrant in your behavior? So then, and then the whole thing about human behavior as well, pretty much anything that's not accepted is within a culture and a place and a people is going to be considered aberrant. So then there's a question of mediating, well, what's truly aberrant? Because what's truly aberrant is dangerous. And yes, that is the thing we always have to mediate is danger. So it's a question of clear sight to get to clear conclusions. And the whole point of getting to clear sight and clear conclusions is to trust your own voice within. The notion that people can just fall apart at mere words. It's like that. Like, I understand how and why that happens, but that is otherwise so alien to me.
God is dead, so become your own.
Well, until you're dethroned too. Maybe there's some middle ground between man and God we have yet to invent.
Yes.
We'll see.
All right. Well, insist on yourself, never imitate. Nothing can bring you peace but yourself. And
well, that's assuming you want peace, because remember, you're just talking about someone who just went to war. You're talking about someone who just, you're talking about Emerson, where he just scathingly critiques, rebukes, and makes suggestions to a decadent and average, an average, for being so. It'd be one thing if we were avaricious. Yeah, okay. Like, I think of the example of the Alexandrians, who apparently, the story goes that whenever a lighthouse would show up, like, they'd confiscate any and all scrolls and books on ship to make copies. You can see where, like, that might seem a bit authoritarian, but in a certain measure, it could be very, it's putting a strict value emphasis on something very particular.
Yes.
And there's more to say here too, though, because when he says nothing can bring you peace, but the triumph of principles, Nietzsche makes it clear that if we're consistent, his theory was this, and I found nothing to contradict this, and maybe he thought there was or wasn't more to this, but, in terms of a quick aphorism and laying out a hypothesis for a theory, it's pretty good. And he said that if we're consistent, it's because of our temperament, i.e., our physiology, and not our, it's more like our default nature and our physiology, our temperament, not so much our principles.
Yes.
And you see that in the liberal Christians or liberal conservative split. You see it in the Apollinian Dionysian split. Those divides in character and characteristics, right? And what they prescribe and how they act, both in people and in art, as what they represent exactly. So, to me, it's like, I don't know if he, I can't help, he doesn't write willy-nilly. These words weren't there by chance. I think he knows what he's saying here when he says be a triumph of principles. When he's saying principles, he's saying principles is synonymous with you.
Yes.
And the notion that anyone's going to find their hope or their promised land or their particular answer to the ills now and into the future. It's just like, well, again, there's nothing to indicate that we actually have that technology or that capability. Nothing in our psychology, in our textbooks, anywhere indicates that anyone is capable of fixing the mess at present, other than letting nature run its course. In the meantime, it is a will to power, and it is a evolutionary power play. Yeah. Within the individuals within the group, and then the larger forces working of the group as well, right? Because as each individual has their struggles within, so the larger forces without.
Exactly.
So at the end of the day, try to understand who and what is feeding you. Is it all just happenstance? Did it just all shake out this way? It's like, no, there is a hand, there is a plate. It's a matter of seeing and understanding it. And and discourse on and polemics on self-reliance.
Cool. Well, I suppose the backpack has been emptied out. It's been sprawled over the bed, and some stuff has been broken. Some bottles have been stabbed into some people. There's been some warfare. There's been some
they're littered everywhere for the children to find too. Yeah,
exactly. So
gotta make sure they have the good stuff.
I appreciate that you've stuck through the whole long ride through. the whole
Yeah, like I
8
said,
episode.
Good to be here. Thanks for having me. It's been a good couple months here. When did we start this? Was it July?
Yeah, yeah, something like that.
Yeah, well, good stuff.
Well, dissolve unto yourself. That's Self Reliance, everybody. Thank you for listening.